Here's a thought that stopped me right in my tracks. In 100 years, you and I will be the ancestors. Think about that. Not some distant sepia toned figures in old photographs. Us, the choices that we make, and the patterns that we break or don't will echo through generations that we'll never meet. So, this raises the uncomfortable question of what kind of an ancestor will you or I become? And I've been thinking about that lately. As you all know, I've been writing a lot about inherited family trauma. There's also inherited ancestral resourcing. There's a lot of things. So, for decades, those of us working in this field have known something that mainstream psychology is only now beginning to accept, that trauma doesn't stop with the person who experienced it, like your ancestors, because the epigenetic research and people like Bruce Lipton he has a lot of videos about all this. Epigenetic research shows that stress and trauma can alter gene expression in ways that pass to children and to grandchildren. For example, the children of Holocaust survivors and the descendants of famine victims and the grandchildren of war. Their bodies carry markers, yours and mine. I am a grandchild of war. Our bodies carry markers of experiences that we haven't personally lived, but our ancestors have lived. And I am old enough to have grandparents and great grandparents who count as ancestors. So the memoir that I'm writing is like going back 130 years. So, spiritual teachers, for example, Thomas Hubble, writes about the radical idea of retrocausality. And Thomas Hubble has been developing a framework that indigenous cultures have understood for millennia, and that we exist, all of us exist, in a web of connection that spans the past, the present, the future, all in once, and that web of interconnection runs in both directions, forward in time, backwards in time, and in the present. And Hubble calls this retrocausality, the idea that the healing work that we do today, that's me and that you, that we do today can actually shift something in our ancestral line. And as Hubble explains it, every time something heals in me, a condition heals in me that is interconnected and spreads into my ancestral tree. And when I change something in my own setup, it has a domino effect into the past. Think about that. It's really, really fascinating. And now, before you dismiss it as mystical thinking, you consider that quantum physics is exploring similar theories about how time and causality actually work. And practically speaking, we know that when one person in a family system changes, the entire system has changed in some way. So, looking at and like trees have a vast root system underneath the ground, and all those roots connect with each other. And Hubble, using that metaphor, Hubble offers a powerful reframe that my ancestry is not just the past, that the lives of my ancestors are living in me today, because I am the culmination of many, many lifetimes that have gone before and that will come. And thinking about that, despite the age on your passport, your body carries hundreds of thousands of years of living. And every achievement that your ancestors made sits within you. And, that kind of emotional complexity and physical function and resilience and the capacity to love and to heal, that is embedded in all of us. But so do their unfinished stories, and that's what I'm most interested in tracking my ancestors. It's all their unfinished stories, and the grief that was never expressed, the trauma that couldn't be processed, and the love that was forbidden, and the truth that was too dangerous to be spoken. These become what Hubble calls, now this is where it gets interesting, Hubble calls it frozen codes, aspects of ancestral experience that got switched off because they were too overwhelming to integrate at the time. But they don't disappear. You know, when somebody dies, their body, their remains decompose, but their energy field carries on. It doesn't die with them. So, what this means for your patterns, do you ever wonder why you keep repeating the same relationship dynamics, even when you've sworn that, I'm never going to be like my mother or I'm never going to be like my father? Hubble suggests that we're not just dealing with our own childhood wounds, and it's not just Hubble. I've done some training recently with Mark Wolin, and lots and lots of others. It's very interesting that it's not just our childhood wounds that we're carrying. We're carrying the unfinished business of our ancestors in their energy field that comes down to us, the emotional material that they couldn't process that got passed to the next generation like an unpaid debt. So this isn't about blaming them. Our ancestors, like all of us, we mostly do the best that we can. And many survived conditions that we can barely imagine in wars and in famines. Displacement, institutional cruelty, colonial violence, and conditions and situations where survival required shutting down aspects of their being, parts of themselves. But that gets frozen in time, and in time it floats to another generation. So what was adaptive for them can become like a prison for us until we bring it to our awareness. As Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will run your life and you will call it fate. And in the writing that I've been doing recently is, I've been, those of you who know me, I've been a therapist for a number of decades now. And, I was really struck by Carl Jung's one of the things he said was, "You were not sent to mend the broken, you were sent to reveal what breaks us all." Well, the fact that we carry ancestral unfinished business coming down energetically is something that we've been doing unconsciously. And I guess I am attempting to reveal what it is that breaks us all in terms of our relationships and things. But there is good news because you have the power to change it. And here's where we can get hopeful. Hubble identified 4 types of ancestral codes we carry. So I've already mentioned the frozen codes, the traumatic material that got switched off. There's also forgotten codes, active codes, and future codes. And, the forgotten codes are the wisdom and the gifts that have been lost to conscious awareness. I'll say more about that in other videos. The frozen codes I've referred to, active codes are patterns that are currently running your life. And often I didn't realize the patterns that were running my life. But as you can see, I've lived long enough now to have enough years behind me to be able to see very clearly a number of the patterns that I've been running and not sure, well, where have these patterns come from? And when I've delved into my ancestral history, which I didn't know about because I didn't grow up with any blood family, but I can see the patterns that have come from my great grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, right down to me, and they're very clear. And then there's also future codes, the potential you carry for generations to come. And this is where we can make a difference because when you become aware of these codes, you can choose to change them. And that is the power that we've got. So that's what I really, really want you to go away from this video with. When you open and update your ancestral code, you create new possibilities. And crucially, you unburden your descendants from repeating or having to relive the same traumas. So, in becoming a conscious ancestor, indigenous traditions have long held that everything we do affects the next generation, next 7 generations, as we've been shaped by the 7 generations that went before us. That I have done another video on the 7 generation hypothesis. So, being a conscious ancestor means taking this seriously. Look, you don't need me to tell you about the state of the world at the moment, and you don't need me to tell you that it's not looking good for what our children and their children are going to inherit. And so, there's a lot of things that we can do at a micro level, but these things I'm talking to you about are things that can be done at a macro level. So it means something I feel deeply moving, that honoring what your ancestors couldn't complete, we can complete it. So the grief that your grandmother couldn't express, you can grieve it. The truth your grandfather couldn't speak, you can speak it. The freedom that your great great grandmother couldn't claim, you can claim it for yourself and for her. So, where do you start? So, Hubble's emphasizes that ancestral healing isn't just intellectual, collecting names and dates. Like I find it fascinating to go through ancestry.com and get all the names of all the people who went before me and when they got married and when they died and who married who. It's very interesting, but it happens, this ancestral healing also happens through the body, through felt connection. That's where the frequency comes from, and through, as Hubble calls it, attunement. And he has written extensively about that. So, I'm making an invitation to you here. We live in a culture of hyper individualism that pretends that we're separate, that we're self made, that we're unconnected to anything that came before. But our bodies know differently, and our patterns know differently. If you watch my other videos, you'll see what it is that I'm talking about. Our triggers know differently. And the invitation of conscious ancestorship, is to expand our sense of self and to recognize that we are both inheritors and transmitters. We're receivers and we're givers, shaped by the past and shapers of the future. So every time you do your healing work, I do mostly by journaling and noticing what I think, what I'm feeling, what the body sensations are, tuning into it, and what's our gut feeling and our senses telling us, and journaling that, making it conscious, raising our awareness, but also somatically. I recently came across a great book, the name of which I can't remember at the moment, but it talked about somatic archaeology. And you notice that tightening in your throat, tightness in your chest, your tension in the pit of your stomach. Those things are messages, and you think it's just a passing thing, but you may discover you've been carrying it all your life and it's not yours. So So discovering this and the archaeology of it is not just therapy, it's activism and it's legacy and it's love that extends through time. So just leaving you with the question, what ancestral patterns are you aware of in your own life? And what would you like to transform for future generations? I'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. There is a playlist of a series of videos on all of this on YouTube if you would rather listen to this in more bite-sized pieces and do the journaling at the same time. So bye for now. Bye.